A country's worst fate is to disappear, and history has seen hundreds of states vanish. Maps have turned once mighty empires into museum relics. You already watch their stories on this channel from time to time. But how does a country cease to exist? Usually through war, by being attacked by a superior army. Yes, Australia is not currently at war, but it is, in a sense, facing an existential threat. They are battling an enemy more disciplined than Genghis Khan's army, more cunning than Constantine, and more strategic than Alexander the Great. Australia has no chance of winning this war. It will inevitably lose. So, who are these formidable enemies? Birds, frogs, and rabbits. The beginning of the problem. Before diving into details, a quick announcement. We put a lot of effort into each video, creating maps, animations, conducting research, and even choosing the right music. To keep making these videos, we need your support. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe. Now, let's head to Australia. Everything started about 100 years ago. On October 24, 1929, the New York Stock Exchange suffered a massive crash. Most American companies had invested heavily on credit, producing goods in excess, but the people couldn't afford to buy them. This led to a chain reaction where companies couldn't sell their products, failed to pay back loans, and stock prices collapsed in a single day. Agriculture was one of the most affected sectors. Farmers, unable to pay off their debts, stopped producing. Since food production was essential to prevent famine, governments had to take action. The impact of the crash wasn't limited to America. Australia, an isolated country in the middle of the ocean, was among the hardest hit. The Great Emu War. By 1930, importing food from other countries was extremely difficult. The Australian government pushed farmers to continue producing wheat and barley, promising financial compensation for any losses. However, they failed to keep this promise, leading to protests. At the same time, Australia's wildlife was undergoing its seasonal migration from east to west. One of its unique animals, the emu, became an unexpected threat. These large flightless birds, standing 1.5 to 2 meters tall and weighing around 70 kilograms, could run at speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour. Their gray feathers allowed them to blend into the landscape, making them natural masters of camouflage. When they encountered vast, unharvested wheat fields, they feasted. With no natural predators and an unlimited food supply, they thrived, multiplying rapidly. In no time, their population reached 20,000, devastating farms and even making farmers too scared to enter their own lands. In response, the Australian government devised a military solution. They formed a volunteer army, armed them with machine guns and 10,000 bullets, and placed a major in charge. Yes, the Australian military officially declared war on the emus. For an entire day, soldiers hunted emus, firing 140 bullets but managing to kill only 12 birds. The Great Emu War. The operation pressed on, but the emus adapted. After days of relentless pursuit, they devised a strategy, stationing a lookout at the front of the flock. If danger approached, the sentinel would signal the others to flee. This simple yet effective tactic outperformed the military's best efforts. With emus reaching speeds of 50 kilometers per hour, hitting them was no easy feat. The army attempted to mount machine guns on trucks, but the rough terrain made aiming nearly impossible. In one case, a vehicle crashed, injuring 2 soldiers. By the time their ammunition was depleted, they had fired 10,000 rounds, only to eliminate 1,000 emus. During a parliamentary debate, one MP jokingly proposed awarding medals for bravery. The response? If anyone deserves medals, it's the emus. They won the war. Realizing that direct combat was futile, the government shifted tactics, arming farmers instead. They even introduced bounties for each emu killed. Over 6 months, 5,000 emus were culled. Yet, despite these efforts, the emu population has since surged beyond 700,000, continuing to inflict millions of dollars in agricultural damage each year. The cane toad catastrophe. In 1935, the British Empire sought to expand its profitable sugarcane industry. Australia's climate was ideal for cultivation, and vast fields were established. But there was a major obstacle: the continent's unique ecosystem. a native insect, Oncophora intricata, had a particular appetite for sugarcane, and with no natural predators to keep its numbers in check, the pest multiplied rapidly, devastating crops. The proposed solution? Importing its natural predator, cane toads. Australia introduced 102 cane toads from South America. Why exactly 102? No one knows. But this decision quickly spiraled into another disaster. The toads couldn't climb the sugar cane to reach the insects, making them completely ineffective. Meanwhile, they reproduced at an alarming rate. Each female could lay up to 30,000 eggs, and once again, Australia had unleashed a species with no natural enemies. To combat the infestation, the government resorted to pesticides. But this only made matters worse. The chemicals poisoned crops and increased cancer risks in humans. Today, Australia suffers millions of dollars in agricultural losses annually due to the unchecked spread of cane toads. The rabbit invasion. Perhaps the most bizarre of these stories involves rabbits. When Captain James Cook discovered Australia in 1770, British settlers soon followed. By the 1800s, wealthy British traders had established themselves in the colony. Missing their traditional hunting activities, they decided to import 24 rabbits to Australia for weekend hunts. However, they weren't as skilled at hunting as they had assumed. Some rabbits escaped, and with no natural predators, their population exploded. Australia's mild winters allowed for year-round breeding, creating the perfect conditions for rapid expansion. Within a century, their numbers had surged into the millions. Today, Australia is home to over 10 million wild rabbits. Unlike emus, they aren't confined to remote areas. They thrive among humans, invading farms and urban spaces alike. In an attempt to control the infestation, the Australian government constructed a 3,000-kilometer-long fence to keep the rabbits out. However, this effort has largely failed. Nature's revenge. The emus, cane toads, and rabbits all share one thing in common. They were either mismanaged native species or introduced species that spiraled out of control. Emus, once dwindling at 12,000, their numbers have surged past 700,000. Farmers have abandoned growing crops the birds favor. Cane toads, brought in to control insects but became a far greater threat, even posing risks to human health. Rabbits, from just 24 to over 10 million, leaving destruction in their wake across the country. Australia waged war on nature and lost. Once home to a unique, balanced ecosystem, the land was reshaped by human greed in pursuit of profit, and nature, it never forgets. How the military fought the emus. The Australian government deployed Major GPW Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, along with 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The plan was simple: track the emus, open fire, and eliminate as many as possible. However, the emus proved to be far more strategic than expected. 1. Speed and evasion. Emus can run up to 50 kilometers per hour, making them extremely difficult targets. They could outrun soldiers and scatter into small groups, reducing casualties from gunfire. 2. Unpredictable movement. Unlike traditional battlefield enemies, emus didn't move in predictable patterns. They zigzagged, dodged bullets, and disappeared into the landscape before soldiers could reload. 3. Failed tactics. The military even attempted mounting machine guns on trucks, thinking they could chase the emus down. However, the rough terrain made aiming impossible, and in one instance, a truck crashed, injuring soldiers instead of the birds. After weeks of failed operations, Major Meredith admitted, "The emus have proved that they are not only speedier than we are, but they are also more intelligent." By the time 10,000 bullets had been fired, only about 1,000 emus had been killed, an astonishing failure rate. The Emu War ended in defeat, and the government withdrew the military from the operation. Consequences of the Great Emu War. Although the government was embarrassed by the loss, the emu problem remained unsolved. Farmers continued to suffer as emu populations grew, consuming crops and damaging farmland. To replace military intervention, the government armed farmers. Instead of using the army, farmers were given rifles and permitted to cull emus themselves. Introduced bounties. The government offered rewards for each emu killed, incentivizing farmers and hunters to control the population. Built a 3,000-kilometer fence. Known as the emu barrier fence, it was meant to keep emus out of agricultural lands, though its effectiveness was limited. Despite these efforts, emus still thrive in Australia today. Their population has grown to over 700,000, and they continue to disrupt farms, proving that nature always finds a way. The ultimate lesson: nature always wins. The Great Emu War is more than just a strange and amusing chapter in history. It's a lesson in human mismanagement of nature. It highlights the consequences of disrupting ecosystems. Without natural predators, emus multiplied unchecked. It shows the failure of military solutions for wildlife problems. Guns and war strategies. The legacy of the Great Emu War. Although the Emu War ended in military failure, it left a lasting impact on Australian history, policy, and even popular culture. 1. The emu's symbolic victory. Despite being seen as a nuisance to farmers, emus became a symbol of resilience and survival. They outmaneuvered an organized military force, proving that nature cannot be easily controlled by human intervention. Today, emus remain a national icon, even appearing on Australia's coat of arms, ironically standing alongside the kangaroo, another species that has caused ecological challenges. 2. Changing agricultural and wildlife policies. After the failure of the Emu War, Australia shifted its approach to dealing with invasive species and wildlife conflicts. Instead of relying on military force, the government began to focus on environmental management strategies, protecting crops through better fencing, land use planning, and controlled culling. Research and wildlife studies. Understanding emu migration patterns and behaviors to develop more effective, nonviolent solutions. Conservation and regulation. Recognizing that native species must be managed, not eradicated, to